I'm Chloe, 28 female. I live in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment where the radiator hisses like a cornered cat and the windows look out onto a symphony of brick walls. For the last 5 years, this has been my entire world. A command center, a sanctuary, and more often than not, a prison of my own design. I'm a freelance app developer, which is a polite way of saying I spend 12 hours a day staring at lines of code, fueled by cheap coffee and the stubborn belief that I can build something meaningful from nothing. It's a solitary life, a constant hustle of chasing small contracts to patch together enough money for rent and ramen, but the work itself, the pure logic and creativity of it, feels like breathing to me. This story isn't about the quiet struggles or the small victories, though. It's about the moment my quiet world collided with the loud, dismissive judgment of my own family. It's about a single Christmas dinner that planted a seed of spite so deep it eventually blossomed into a multi-million-dollar tree, and how the very people who mocked the seed are now desperately trying to claim the fruit. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The drive to my parents' house for Christmas always felt like traveling back in time. The moment I left the city limits, the landscape would soften from concrete and steel to rolling hills and familiar, snow-dusted trees. My little sedan, usually covered in a film of city grime, seemed to breathe easier out here. But so did I, or at least, I tried to. Christmas was supposed to be a time of warmth, of reconnecting, of that cozy, nostalgic feeling you see in holiday movies. For me, it was an annual performance review, where the jury was composed entirely of my relatives. My family operates on a very clear, unspoken hierarchy. At the top are my parents, traditionalists who value stability and security above all else. They love me, I know they do, but they've never understood my career path. To them, a job involves a commute, a cubicle, and a pension plan. My life, working from a laptop in my pajamas, is a source of quiet, constant worry for them. Then there's my older brother, Mark, 32 and already a junior vice president at an investment bank. Mark is the golden child, the family's success story. He wears tailored suits, has a handshake that could crush walnuts, and speaks in a language of portfolios, mergers, and acquisitions. He treats my career with the kind of condescending amusement one might reserve for a child's lemonade stand. To him, my work wasn't a business. It was a cute little hobby. Circling him like satellites were my Aunt Carol and her daughter, my cousin Jessica. Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, had made a career out of being a homemaker and a professional gossip. Her life was a meticulously curated album of suburban perfection, and she judged everyone else's life against her own impossibly pristine standards. Anyone who deviated from the path of marriage, mortgage, and 2.5 kids was a topic of concerned whispers over coffee. Jessica, just a year older than me, had translated that judgment into the digital age. She was a social media influencer, her life a constant stream of filtered photos from sponsored vacations, showcasing gifted designer bags and flawless makeup. Her entire self-worth was measured in likes and follower counts, and she couldn't comprehend a life that wasn't publicly validated. The only beacon of light in this familial constellation was my grandmother, Eleanor. At 78, she was the quiet matriarch, a retired librarian who possessed a gentle wisdom the rest of them seemed to lack entirely. She never offered unsolicited advice or passed judgment. Instead, she listened. She'd ask me about my projects, her eyes lighting up with genuine curiosity as I tried to explain complex coding concepts. She didn't always understand the technical details, but she understood the passion. She was my silent ally, a port in the storm of family gatherings. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house was already blazing with light, a picture-perfect Christmas scene. Wreaths on every window, a snowman with a jaunty carrot nose on the lawn. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation from inside. Taking a deep breath, I plastered a smile on my face, grabbed the ridiculously small dessert I'd brought, and prepared to enter the lion's den. I told myself this year would be different. This year, I would be confident. I would be immune to their little jabs. I wouldn't let them get to me. I had no idea that this year wouldn't just get to me, it would fundamentally change the entire course of my life. The air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine needles and wood smoke. It smelled like Christmas. But as I walked towards that brightly lit front door, all I felt was a gathering chill. The inside of the house was an assault on the senses. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, the overwhelming heat from the fireplace, and the glittering chaos of Christmas decorations that my mom had been adding to for 30 years. Every surface was draped in tinsel or occupied by a ceramic Santa. It was suffocatingly festive. "Chloe, you made it," my mom said, bustling over to give me a hug that smelled of hairspray and gravy. My dad gave me a brief, firm pat on the back, his classic greeting that conveyed both affection and a slight awkwardness. The evening started as it always did, with small talk and passive-aggressive pleasantries. Aunt Carol cornered me by the eggnog, asking if I was seeing anyone special, her tone implying that at 27, my time was rapidly running out. I politely dodged the question and made my escape, only to be intercepted by Jessica, who was busy taking a selfie with the Christmas tree. "Oh my God, Chloe, love the sweater," she said, without looking away from her phone screen. "Is that vintage? It's so quaint." The sweater was from a major department store, purchased last week. Quaint was her polite word for cheap. I found my grandmother in her usual armchair by the fire, a book open in her lap. "Hello, dear," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "Tell me, how is the new project coming along?" We spoke for a few precious minutes, her questions thoughtful and her interest a balm to my already frayed nerves. But soon enough, my mother called everyone to the table, and the real festivities began. The dining table was a masterpiece of holiday excess. A massive turkey sat center stage, surrounded by at least a dozen side dishes. The good china was out, the silverware polished to a mirror shine. For the first hour, the conversation was safe. Mark talked at length about his year-end bonus and a recent trip to the Cayman Islands. Jessica recounted a dramatic saga involving a brand partnership that had gone wrong. My parents and Aunt Carol listened with rapt attention, interjecting with oohs and ahs at all the right moments. I mostly stayed quiet, focusing on my food. I knew my turn was coming. It always did. It was my dad who innocently lit the fuse. "So, Chloe," he said during a lull in Mark's monologue, "what have you been up to? Still doing those computer things?" A collective silence fell over the table as all eyes turned to me. It felt less like a question and more like an accusation. I swallowed a mouthful of mashed potatoes and tried to sound upbeat. "It's going really well, actually," I started, my voice a little too bright. "I'm developing my own application. It's an organizational tool designed to help creative freelancers manage their projects and invoices. I think there's a real market for it." I was genuinely excited about it. It was the first project that was entirely mine, born from my own experiences and frustrations. I thought, perhaps naively, that they might see the ambition in it, the entrepreneurial spirit. Mark was the first to react. He set down his wine glass with a soft clink and leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "An app, huh? That's nice, Chloe." He used the diminutive nickname I hated. "What's your business model? Subscription-based? Freemium with ad support? Have you done a competitive analysis? The market is completely saturated. You're about 5 years too late to that party." His questions weren't meant to be helpful. They were a test, designed to expose my ignorance. "I've researched it, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My app has specific features that others don't. It's for a niche audience." "A niche audience is just code for no one will pay for it," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Look, I'm just being realistic. You need a solid business plan, seed funding, a marketing strategy. You can't just cook something up in your apartment and expect to compete with the big boys in Silicon Valley." Aunt Carol, sensing blood in the water, jumped in. "He's right, dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "It sounds like a lovely hobby, but it's not a career. "You're so smart, Chloe. You could get a real job, something secure. With the government, maybe. They have wonderful benefits and a pension." The word hobby stung like a slap. I had poured thousands of hours into this, sacrificed weekends and sleep, and to them, it was just a little pastime, like knitting or collecting stamps. Jessica let out a little laugh, covering her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers. "I mean, it's cute, but can it even pay your rent? My last sponsored post paid for my trip to Bali. You should just come work for me. I need someone to organize my DMs. I'd even pay you." The offer was so insulting, so demeaning, I was momentarily speechless. I looked to my parents for support, but they just sat there, looking uncomfortable. Avoiding my gaze, their silence was the deepest cut of all. It was a tacit agreement with everything the others were saying. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, a mixture of shame and white-hot anger. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell them about my vision, about the hours of work, about how much this meant to me. But before I could get a word out, Mark delivered the final, crushing blow. He leaned forward, looking me dead in the eye, and said with an air of finality, "Just listen to us, Chloe. We're your family. We're trying to help you. You'll never make real money doing that." And then, the worst part happened. They laughed. Not a mean, cruel laugh, but something far more painful. A light, dismissive, pitying chuckle that echoed around the table. It was the laugh of people who had already written you off, who saw your dreams as nothing more than a childish fantasy. In that moment, something inside me broke. I looked around the table at their smiling, condescending faces. My brother, the self-proclaimed financial genius. My aunt, the guardian of conventionality. My cousin, the queen of superficiality. And my parents, the silent accomplices. The only person not laughing was my grandmother. Our eyes met across the table, and she gave me a look that was part apology, part encouragement. It was a tiny gesture, but it was the only thing that kept me from bursting into tears right there at the Christmas dinner table. I simply nodded, picked up my fork, and took another bite of turkey, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. The laughter died down, and the conversation moved on, leaving my ambition and my dignity in tatters on the floor. But they had misjudged me. They thought their laughter had extinguished my fire. They had no idea they had just thrown gasoline on it. The drive home was a blur of dark roads and the hypnotic sweep of my windshield wipers against a light, sleeting snow. The festive warmth of my parents' house had been replaced by a profound, isolating cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. I drove in complete silence, the radio off, the only sound the hum of the engine and the deafening replay of that laughter in my head. Each chuckle, each smirk, each dismissive word played on a loop, Mark's condescending tone as he dissected my business model. Aunt Carol's syrupy voice suggesting a real job. Jessica's tinkling laugh as she offered me a pity job managing her social media. And worse than all of it, the shared, pitying laugh after Mark's final proclamation. It wasn't just mockery, it was a verdict. In their eyes, I had already failed. When I finally got back to my apartment, the place that had once felt like my sanctuary now felt like a cage. My desk, with its dual monitors and organized chaos of notebooks and cables, seemed to mock me. This was the command center for my grand, foolish dream. The project I had poured my heart into, the app that I believed could genuinely help people, now felt juvenile and pointless. Their voices had followed me home, seeping into the walls and poisoning my confidence. The betrayal I felt was multi-layered. The overt criticism from my brother, aunt, and cousin was one thing. I had come to expect it from them in a way. They were predictable in their narrow-mindedness. The deeper wound came from my parents. Their silence was a betrayal of a different kind. It was a quiet, passive abandonment. By not speaking up, by not offering a single word of defense or encouragement, they had cost the judgment. They had chosen to keep the peace at the dinner table rather than support their own daughter. I wondered if they were ashamed of me, if my unconventional path was an embarrassment to them. The thought was a physical ache in my chest. For the next 2 weeks, I was adrift. I'd wake up and stare at my computer, the lines of code looking like a foreign language. The passion that had driven me for months was gone, replaced by a hollow echo of self-doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a fool, playing at being an entrepreneur in my tiny apartment. The app market was saturated. I didn't have a business degree or seed funding. Who was I to think I could succeed where thousands of others had failed? I started browsing job boards, looking at listings for corporate coding positions. The descriptions were soul-crushing: maintaining legacy systems for insurance companies, debugging payroll software. They promised stability, benefits, a 401k, all the things my family valued. It was the real job Aunt Carol had spoken of. It felt like a life sentence. The echoes of their laughter haunted my days. I'd be making coffee and suddenly hear Mark's smug voice. "A niche audience is just code for no one will pay for it." I'd be trying to fall asleep and see Jessica's filtered, smiling face as she offered to let me organize her DMs. These memories weren't just memories, they were ghosts, and they were relentless. The turning point came on a gray, miserable January afternoon. I was sitting on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling aimlessly through my phone when my grandmother called. I almost didn't answer. I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was okay, but something made me press the green button. "Chloe dear," she said, her voice a welcome comfort. "I was just thinking of you." "Hi, Grandma," I mumbled. She didn't ask if I was all right. She already knew. "That was a difficult dinner," she said softly. "Yeah," was all I could manage. "They don't understand, you know," she continued. "They live in a world of straight lines and clear paths. Anything that curves or ventures into the unknown frightens them. Their words, they come from that fear, not from a place of truth." I was silent, listening. "I remember when I told my father I wanted to be a librarian," she said, her voice drifting with the memory. "He was horrified. He said it was no place for a woman, that I should be a secretary or a nurse until I found a husband. He said I was wasting my mind on dusty old books." She paused. "I loved every single day of my 40 years in that library. It was my path, not his." Then she said the words that would change everything. "Don't let their noise drown out your own voice, dear. Your voice is the only one that matters." We talked for a little while longer about books and the weather and other simple things. When we hung up, I felt a subtle shift inside me. Her words hadn't magically erased the hurt, but they had given me a different perspective. My family wasn't some all-knowing tribunal. They were just people, flawed, fearful, and limited by their own experiences. Their opinions weren't facts. I stood up and walked over to my desk. The doubt was still there, a heavy fog in my mind. But now there was something else alongside it: anger. A cold, clarifying anger. How dare they? How dare they sit in their comfortable, predictable lives and pass judgment on my ambition? How dare they laugh at something they didn't even try to understand? The hurt from their betrayal began to harden, to crystallize into something else. It became resolve. It became fuel. Their laughter was no longer a haunting echo, it was a challenge. I took a piece of paper and a black marker. In big, block letters, I wrote out Mark's words: "You'll never make real money doing that." I taped it to the wall directly above my monitors, right in my line of sight. It would be the first thing I saw every morning and the last thing I saw every night. It was no longer an insult. It was a promise. A promise to myself that I wouldn't just prove them wrong. I would make their words so spectacularly, so undeniably incorrect that they would be forced to eat them, one by one. Their betrayal had given me a gift I never knew I needed, a reason to succeed that was bigger than just myself. It was about reclaiming my own story. With my newfound motivation, the first thing I did was take a brutally honest look at my app. In the sober light of day, I had to admit that my family's criticism, however cruelly delivered, contained a kernel of truth. My original concept, an organizational tool for creative freelancers, was a good idea, but it was a small one. Mark was right. The market for general productivity apps was incredibly crowded. My app was a small fish in an ocean teeming with sharks like Trello, Asana, and 100 other well-funded competitors. To succeed, my little passion project needed to evolve into something bigger, something more specialized, something indispensable. I didn't abandon my work. Instead, I started treating my family's mockery as a set of parameters for a problem I had to solve. The problem wasn't just how to build an app, but how to build an app that will generate the kind of money they can't ignore. The question became my obsession. I spent the next month in a deep dive of intense research, not into code, but into markets. I read tech journals, business publications, and forums searching for a niche, a corner of the professional world that was being underserved by current technology. I looked at dozens of industries: agriculture, shipping, event planning, manufacturing. Each had its own unique logistical challenges, but most were already being catered to by large, established software companies. I was looking for a very specific type of problem, one that was complex, high stakes, and involved a lot of moving parts that existing software handled poorly. I needed a logistical nightmare that I could solve with elegant, intuitive code. The discovery moment didn't come in a flash of genius while staring out a rain-streaked window. It came during a casual Zoom call with an old college friend, a woman named Maya who I hadn't spoken to in years. We were just catching up, talking about our lives and careers. Maya had ended up in a field I knew almost nothing about: international art logistics. Her job was to manage the transportation of fine art, millions of dollars, between museums, galleries, and private collectors around the world. As she described her work, my ears perked up. She wasn't bragging, she was complaining. "Honestly, Chloe, it's a chaotic mess," she said, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "Right now, I'm coordinating a single sculpture's move from a private collection in Japan to a museum in Paris. I'm juggling emails with the seller, the buyer, and the museum curators. I'm on the phone with 3 different shipping companies, one for ground, one for air freight, one for the final delivery. I'm tracking customs paperwork on a government website, managing insurance documents in a separate PDF, and coordinating with specialized art handlers via text message. My master plan is literally a massive spreadsheet and about 50 sticky notes on my wall. If one thing goes wrong, if one email gets missed, a $10 million piece of art could end up stuck on a tarmac in Dubai." As she spoke, it was like a light bulb didn't just go on in my head. A whole stadium's worth of floodlights flickered to life. This was it. This was the logistical nightmare I had been searching for. It was a high-stakes, high-value industry filled with professionals who were still relying on spreadsheets, emails, and sticky notes. Their problem wasn't a lack of organization. It was a lack of a single, unified platform to manage an incredibly complex process. "Maya," I interrupted, my heart starting to pound. "What if you had one place for all of that? A single dashboard where you could see the entire process in real time, where the curators, the shippers, and the insurance agents could all log in and update their part of the process, and you would get instant notifications, where all the documents were stored securely in one place and every communication was tracked." Maya stared at me through the screen. "That would be a miracle," she said slowly. "That would change everything. I would pay a fortune for that. My company would pay a fortune for that." A fortune. The word hung in the air. This was the niche. It was specific, it was underserved, and the clients weren't price-sensitive. When you're dealing with multi-million-dollar assets, paying a few $1,000s a month for a piece of software that guarantees a smooth, secure process is a no-brainer. It's a rounding error. The moment we ended the call, I was a woman possessed. I completely scrapped about 40% of my existing code. My simple project management app was dead. In its place, a new, far more ambitious vision was taking shape. This wouldn't be Chloe's cute organizer anymore. This would be a powerful, enterprise-level logistics platform. I tentatively named it Aegis, after the mythical shield of protection. It felt right. I would be building a digital shield for priceless things. I dove into the new concept with a ferocity I hadn't felt before. My freelancer-focused features, invoice templates, time tracking, were replaced with new, complex modules: multi-layered access permissions for different stakeholders, encrypted document storage, real-time GPS tracking integration, and automated customs form generation. Every feature was designed to solve a specific pain point Maya had described. The excitement was electric. I felt like I had discovered a secret world. While my family thought I was still tinkering away on my little hobby, I was mapping out the architecture for a tool that could disrupt an entire global industry. The spark of the idea had been ignited, not by some grand vision of changing the world, but by listening to a friend's complaint. And that spark was about to be fanned into a raging fire, fueled by the memory of my family's dismissive laughter. They wanted me to make real money. I had a feeling I was finally on the path to making an amount they couldn't even comprehend. The next 9 months of my life were a blur of monastic focus. My apartment, once just a place to live, transformed into a dedicated incubator. I adopted a routine that was as punishing as it was productive. My day started at 6 a.m. with a pot of coffee and ended whenever I could no longer see the screen. Often well after 2 a.m., I ate most of my meals at my desk, slept in 4-hour increments, and spoke to almost no one. My world shrank to the glowing rectangle of my monitor, the intricate web of code I was weaving, and the taunting piece of paper taped to the wall above it. This phase was all about building in the shadows. I knew that a great idea was worthless without flawless execution, and for my app, Aegis, flawless execution meant it had to be perfectly tailored to the industry it was meant to serve. I couldn't build it in a vacuum. I had to become an expert in a world I barely knew existed a few months prior. My investigation began with Maya. She became my unofficial, unpaid consultant. I'd send her wireframes and early prototypes, and we'd have weekly calls where she would ruthlessly pick them apart. The customs document tab needs to be more prominent, she'd say. We need a way to flag high-risk transit zones. Can you add a feature for condition reports with photo uploads? Her feedback was invaluable, a direct line into the mind of my target user. But I knew I couldn't rely on one person's perspective. I needed more data. So, I embarked on a campaign of quiet, careful intelligence gathering. I joined online forums for logistics professionals and art handlers. I created a fake profile on a professional networking site, posing as a graduate student researching supply chain management for a thesis. It felt a little deceptive, but it was necessary. Under this guise, I reached out to dozens of people in the industry: curators, shipping managers, insurance brokers, and even private collectors' assistants. I told them I was studying the unique challenges of high-value asset transportation and asked if they would be willing to spare 30 minutes for an interview. To my surprise, most of them were happy to talk. People love to complain about their jobs, and I gave them the perfect platform to do so. I listened to their war stories. I heard about a Renaissance painting that missed its exhibition opening because of a typo on a customs form. I heard about a sculpture damaged because the climate control in a cargo hold failed and no one was alerted. I heard about the endless back and forth of emails and phone calls required just to confirm an item's location. Each story of failure and frustration was a treasure trove of information, highlighting another pain point that Aegis could solve. I meticulously documented everything, translating their real-world problems into technical requirements for my app. Their frustrations became my feature list. The need for constant communication became an integrated, encrypted messaging system. The fear of lost paperwork became a centralized, cloud-based document vault with version control. The anxiety over an asset's location became a real-time tracking map that pulled data from multiple shipping carriers. All this time, I was completely off the radar with my family. They'd call occasionally, and I'd give them vague, boring updates. "How's work going, honey?" my mom would ask. "Same old, Mom. Just working on some freelance coding projects," I'd reply, letting the lie of omission hang in the air. "Oh, that's nice," she'd say, her lack of follow-up questions making it clear she had no real interest. Mark texted me once, a link to an article titled "Why 90% of Tech Startups Fail." The accompanying message read, "Some light reading for you, just looking out for my little sis." I replied with a simple thanks and used the rage it induced to power through another 18-hour coding session. The process of building Aegis was grueling. There were moments of despair, like when a critical bug in the database corrupted a week's worth of test data, or when I realized a core feature had to be completely re-architected. In those dark moments, when I was exhausted and overwhelmed, I would look up at the sign above my desk. "You'll never make real money doing that." It was my North Star of spite. It reminded me why I was sacrificing my sleep, my social life, and my sanity. Every line of code I wrote was a silent act of rebellion. After 8 months of relentless development and research, I had a working prototype. It was powerful, secure, and I believed a game changer. I gave free beta access to Maya and a handful of the other professionals I had interviewed, the ones who had been the most helpful. I told them it was a new tool I was testing and asked for their honest feedback. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails started pouring in. "This is incredible. Where has this been all my life? You've solved a problem I didn't even know how to articulate." Maya called me, practically screaming with excitement. "Chloe, this is it. This is the miracle I was talking about. My boss saw me using it and wants to know when we can buy it for the whole department." That was the first time I truly allowed myself to believe. The long nights, the isolation, the relentless self-doubt, it was all going to be worth it. I was no longer just building an app in the shadows. I was forging a key, and I was about to find out just how many doors it could unlock. The positive feedback from the beta test was the validation I desperately needed, but it was Maya's boss wanting to buy the software that shifted my perspective entirely. My goal had always been to prove my family wrong, but I had been thinking on too small a scale. I had envisioned launching the app, getting subscribers, and showing them a steady, impressive income stream. The idea of a full acquisition, a single, massive transaction, hadn't been on my radar. It was a faster, more definitive, and infinitely more dramatic way to achieve my goal. The plan began to form. Instead of a public launch, I pursue a strategic, private demonstration for a few key players in the art logistics world. The beta testers had already created a quiet buzz. My goal was to leverage that buzz into a bidding war. The first official email came not from Maya's company, but from one of their largest competitors, a global logistics firm named Valero Group. Their head of technology had apparently heard about Aegis from a curator who was in my beta program. The email was polite, corporate, and sent a jolt of electricity through me. They requested a formal demonstration. Suddenly, this was no longer a one-woman operation run from a tiny apartment. I was about to step into a corporate boardroom and pitch a piece of software for what I hoped would be a life-changing amount of money. I was terrified. I knew code, not commerce. I could write a brilliant algorithm, but I couldn't read a term sheet. I immediately called the one person I knew who could help. A friend from a past freelance project named Ben was a few years older than me, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who had left a big corporate firm to advise tech startups. I explained the whole situation, from the Christmas dinner to the email from Valero. He was silent for a moment after I finished. "Chloe," he said, his voice serious, "this is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. You have all the leverage here. They need you, you don't need them, but you cannot walk into that room alone." I hired him on the spot, offering him a small percentage of any final deal. It was the best decision I ever made. Ben became my coach, my strategist, and my shield. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the Valero meeting. He drilled me on potential questions, helped me craft a slick presentation, and most importantly, taught me the art of saying nothing. "Let them talk," he advised. "The more they talk, the more they reveal what they want and what they're willing to pay for it. Your job is to demonstrate the product and then shut up." The day of the demonstration felt completely surreal. I wore the most expensive suit I could afford, which still felt like a costume. We walked into Valero's headquarters, a temple of glass and steel in the heart of the financial district. The boardroom was intimidating, filled with stern-looking executives in identical gray suits. I took a deep breath, plugged in my laptop, and began. I didn't talk about business models or market projections. I just told them a story, Maya's story. I walked them through the logistical nightmare of moving a single piece of art, the chaos of emails, spreadsheets, and sticky notes. I could see them nodding. They knew this story. It was their daily reality. Then I showed them Aegis. I demonstrated the clean dashboard, the real-time tracking, the secure document portal, the seamless communication log. I showed them how a process that took dozens of hours and multiple platforms could be managed by one person from one screen. The room was completely silent. I could feel the energy shift from polite skepticism to intense focus. When I finished, the head of technology, a man named Mr. Davies, looked at me, then at his CEO. "It's perfect," he said, his voice filled with something that sounded like awe. "It solves every single one of our primary pain points." As Ben had coached me, I simply smiled and said, "I'm glad you think so." The CEO leaned forward. "Ms. Vance, this is a very impressive piece of work. We're not interested in a licensing deal. We want to acquire the software and the intellectual property outright. We'd also want to retain you on a consulting basis to oversee its integration." My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. Ben stepped in smoothly. "We appreciate the generous offer," he said, even though no numbers had been mentioned yet. "As you can imagine, we're exploring a number of strategic partnerships at the moment. We have another demonstration scheduled with a competitor next week." This was a bluff, but a brilliant one. The executives exchanged glances. The CEO didn't miss a beat. "We can make you a preliminary offer by the end of the day. We're prepared to be very competitive." The preliminary offer came in that afternoon, $1.5 million. I almost fainted when Ben told me. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. "We're not taking it," Ben said calmly. "What, are you crazy?" I stammered. "Chloe, that's their opening shot. They're testing us," he explained. "Now we use it." Ben's plan was masterful. He confidentially leaked Valero's interest to Maya's company and one other major player in the industry. Suddenly, the bluff was real. Both companies immediately demanded their own demonstrations. Within a week, I had 3 massive corporations in a silent bidding war for my little hobby. The negotiations took a month. It was a nerve-wracking process of offers and counteroffers, with Ben acting as the calm, unshakable gatekeeper. The numbers kept climbing. $1.8 million, $2.2 million. The final offer came from Valero, who were determined not to lose the software to their rivals. Ben called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. "Just tell me." They've come back with their final, best offer. $2.7 million plus a 2-year, 7-figure consulting contract for you. We don't have to take it, but Chloe, this is the number. $2,700,000. I wrote it down on a piece of paper, staring at the zeros. It didn't feel real. The code that I had written in my tiny apartment, fueled by spite and coffee, was worth millions of dollars. Signing the final papers in a lawyer's office felt like an out-of-body experience. The room was filled with suits, the table was piled high with documents, and all I could think about was my family sitting around that Christmas dinner table, laughing. 2 days later, the wire transfer hit my bank account. I opened my banking app, and there it was. The number was so long it barely fit on the screen. For a few minutes, I just sat there in my worn-out desk chair in my little apartment and I cried. Not tears of joy, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The fight was over. I had won. The $1 million code was real. And now, the fun could begin. I didn't tell my family. I knew the news of the acquisition would get out eventually, but I wanted the discovery to be on their terms, not mine. The press release from Valero Group was published on a Thursday morning. It was a dry, corporate announcement buried on business news websites, but it mentioned the name of the software, Aegis, and its creator, me, Chloe Vance. For 2 days, there was silence. I imagined the news spreading slowly, like a ripple in a pond. Perhaps a business-savvy friend of my father's saw it, or maybe one of Mark's colleagues. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The first call came on Saturday morning. It was my mother. Her voice was a mixture of confusion, excitement, and a hint of accusation. "Chloe, your father just got a call from his friend Bob. He sent us an article, something about your app. It says it was bought for millions of dollars. Is that true?" "Hi, Mom," I said calmly, sipping my coffee. "Yeah, it's true." "Oh my goodness," she gasped. "Why didn't you tell us? This is wonderful news. Your father and I are so proud of you." There it was, pride. A sentiment I hadn't heard from them in years. It was amazing how a few extra zeros in my bank account could suddenly make my career path so understandable to them. We spoke for a few more minutes, their happiness seeming genuine, if shallow. They were proud of the result, not the process. I could live with that. An hour later, my brother Mark called. The caller ID flashed on my screen, and I took a deep, steadying breath before answering. His tone was one I had never heard from him before. It was slick, sycophantic, and utterly transparent. "Chloe, hey, I saw the news. Incredible, absolutely incredible," he gushed. "I knew you had it in you. I always said you were the smart one." I almost laughed out loud at the blatant revisionist history. "You did?" I asked, my voice dripping with false innocence. "Of course, remember that Christmas? I was just trying to push you, you know? A little tough love to get you to think about the business side of things. Clearly, it worked," he said, laughing as if we were in on the same joke. "Listen, now that you're coming into some serious capital, you need to be smart about it. You can't just let it sit in a savings account. We should have dinner next week. I can help you put together a proper investment portfolio, make that money work for you. I won't even charge you my usual family rate." His audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't just congratulating me, he was immediately trying to insert himself into my finances, to take control, to prove that he was still the financial expert, and I was still the naive little sister who needed his guidance. "That's so generous of you to offer, Mark," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I'll definitely have to think about that. Thanks for calling." I hung up before he could respond, a cold smile on my face. The next call, an hour later, was from Aunt Carol. If Mark's approach was slick, hers was a masterclass in manipulative guilt. "Chloe, darling," she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "I just heard the most wonderful news from your mother. I am just bursting with pride. I always knew you were a special girl, so creative and clever. I used to tell your mother all the time, that Chloe, she's going to do something amazing one day." The lie was so bald-faced, it was almost impressive. "Anyway, darling," she continued, not pausing for breath, "it's funny that this should happen right now. Your Uncle Jim's business has been struggling a bit, you know, with the economy, and poor Jessica's car just broke down completely. It's just and one thing after another. With all this good fortune, you must feel so blessed. You know, they say that what you give out comes back to you tenfold." The hint was as subtle as a brick to the head. She wasn't asking for a handout. She was framing it as my moral obligation. "I'll keep that in mind, Aunt Carol," I said politely. "It was lovely to hear from you." I ended the call, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. They were all performing exactly as I had predicted. The final communication was, in many ways, the most galling. It was a text from my cousin Jessica. It started with a string of a dozen sparkling heart and money bag emojis. "OMGCHLOE, money mouth face congrats. Partying face, I saw the news and I am so proud of you. We have to do a collab for my channel. My millionaire cousin's success story. It would get so many views. BTW, have you seen the new listings at the new condo building downtown? Winking face, a girl can dream, right? Lol, but seriously, we need to celebrate. Brunch on me. JK, you're buying, winking face with tongue." The text was a perfect distillation of her personality. Self-serving, entitled, and completely transactional. She saw my success not as my own achievement, but as a new source of content and a potential ATM. I spent the rest of the day fielding their calls and texts. Each one followed the same pattern: effusive, fake praise, a quick rewriting of history to position themselves as my lifelong supporter, and then a pivot to how my newfound wealth could benefit them. I remained polite, calm, and non-committal to all of them. "I'll think about it," We'll have to talk. Thanks for the suggestion. I gave them just enough rope, letting them spin their own webs of greed and entitlement. I listened as they exposed their true characters, and with every word they spoke, they solidified my resolve. They had no idea what my response was going to be, but I was already planning it. And it was going to be served at Christmas. As the year drew to a close, the requests from my family became more frequent and less subtle. Mark sent me a detailed, unsolicited financial plan he had drafted for me. Aunt Carol started sending me links to GoFundMe pages for distant relatives. Jessica's texts became a stream of links to designer handbags and luxury vacation packages, all accompanied by winking emojis. Through it all, I remained pleasantly vague, telling them we would discuss everything at Christmas. Their anticipation was palpable. They thought they were coming to a negotiation. They had no idea they were coming to a reckoning. This year, I was hosting. I booked a private dining room at the city's most elegant and expensive restaurant, a place where a single bottle of wine cost more than my old monthly rent. I wanted the setting to be perfect, a stage for the final act of a play that had started 1 year ago. I arrived early, watching as they came in one by one. They were dressed in their finest clothes, their faces shining with greedy expectation. They saw the opulent room, the crisply dressed waiters, the fine china, and they saw it all as a preview of the lavish lifestyle they were about to share in. The only person who seemed unimpressed by the grandeur was my grandmother, Eleanor. I had sent a private car to pick her up, and she arrived with a small, simply wrapped gift for me. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I am so proud of the woman you've become, Chloe. Not for the money, for the strength." Her words were the only true validation I needed. Dinner was a tense affair. Mark, Carol, and Jessica spent the entire time trying to one-up each other with praise for me, recounting fabricated memories of my childhood genius. It was a nauseating performance. I let them talk, smiling and nodding, allowing their expectations to inflate like a balloon. Finally, after the main course plates were cleared, I stood up, tapping my water glass with a spoon. "I'd like to make a toast," I said. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me, hungry and expectant. "1 year ago," I began, my voice steady and clear, "we were all sitting around another dinner table. We were talking about my work, my passion. I was trying to explain the app I was building." I turned my eyes to Mark. "You told me the market was saturated. You asked if I had a business model and informed me that a niche audience was code for no one will pay for it. You said I was 5 years too late to the party." Mark's smile faltered. I then looked at Aunt Carol. "You told me it was a lovely hobby, but not a career. You suggested I get a real job with the government for the security and the pension." Her face began to pale. My gaze shifted to Jessica. "And you called my work cute. You asked if it could even pay my rent and offered to hire me to organize your social media messages." Jessica stared down at her plate, her cheeks flushing a deep red. "And then," I said, my voice dropping slightly as I looked at all three of them, the conversation ended with a definitive statement, a final verdict on my ambition. It was, and I quote, "You'll never make real money doing that." And then you all laughed. The silence in the room was now thick and heavy. The air of celebration had vanished, replaced by a cold, dawning horror on their faces. "For a long time, those words and that laughter almost broke me," I continued. "But eventually, I realized you had given me a gift. You gave me the most powerful motivation I could have ever asked for. Your dismissal became my determination. Your mockery became my mission. And you were right about one thing: you all deserve a share in my success. Because, in a way, I couldn't have done it without you." A flicker of hope returned to their eyes. They thought this was a bizarre preamble to their payday. I reached into my bag and pulled out 4 envelopes. I slid the first one across the table to Mark, then one to Carol and one to Jessica. They tore them open with trembling fingers. Inside each envelope there was no check. Instead, there was a beautiful, professionally framed piece of calligraphy. On it, in elegant black ink, were the words, "You'll never make real money doing that." Beneath the quote, I had affixed a laminated copy of the press release announcing the $2.7 million acquisition of my company. Tucked behind the frame was a small, simple card. It read, "Thank you for the motivation. This is your share." The reactions were everything I had hoped for and more. Mark stared at the frame as if it were a snake, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Aunt Carol let out a small, strangled gasp, and her eyes filled with tears of humiliation. Jessica just looked small, her carefully constructed influencer persona crumbling into dust. "What is this?" Mark finally sputtered, his voice trembling with rage. "Is this a joke?" "No," I said calmly. "It's a reminder of the value of your support." Then I turned to my grandmother. I slid the fourth envelope over to her. "Grandma, this is for you." She opened it slowly. Inside was not a framed quote, but a check for $100,000. Behind it was a handwritten letter that I had spent a week writing, pouring out all my gratitude for her quiet, unwavering belief in me when no one else had it. I thanked her for teaching me that the only voice that matters is your own. She read the letter, and a single, genuine tear rolled down her cheek. She looked at me, her eyes shining. "Oh, Chloe," she whispered. I stood up from the table. "I believe I promised you all dinner," I said, looking at my stunned, silent family. "I've taken care of the bill. You can stay and enjoy dessert."